Hello, I'm Joshua, and I'm an INTP, and first and foremost, I would like to say thank you for viewing this video and subsequently visiting this channel. Upon request, this topic will be on René Descartes' Cogito Ergo Sum. And this is an expression within philosophy that has a great deal of historical fame and possibly what most people who haven't read philosophy have at some point in time in their lives heard this expression and may understand the veracity and the significance of it. I am being asked to give my own analyses and take on the proposition itself, and I think, to go into a bit of a history of the whole reason for the idea and the conception in the first place is a bit necessary, and then to bring in, I suppose, antecedent thoughts that are in the now about just the nature of subjectivity, being in consciousness will give, I think, a greater breadth of revivification of consideration and illumination on just the thought itself, or just the proposition. Just what is it that Descartes is trying to show us, and what is it that he's teaching us with his method of doubt, and that because the method of doubt is where the expression emerges. So, given the history of European thought at the time, Descartes comes post-Enlightenment, and so he comes post-rational conception and materialism, with new advances in physics and science, particularly within biology and anatomy, because this is post-Renaissance, and a new understanding of the human being as a corpus, as something with the body and forces acting on the body and its material agency. So Descartes is embedded now within a world extant to him because of empirical senses and pure deducible reasoning capacities. But what Descartes labors out to do is to create a unified understanding of reality in the world that is before us. And so far as Descartes has a tree of epistemology where he considers philosophy and metaphysics to be at the root, physics to be at the trunk of this thing, and all other branches and disciplines of science, to be the branches, all other types of sciences to be the branches, to where he has a hierarchy of values in this scheme, to where he holds that all knowledge comes from the purest sense of deduction and reasoning. However, Descartes wants all knowledge to be unified, and he's been highly trained in mathematics, so what he would like to rely upon is the same kind of certainty he can in mathematics due to first-ordered principles or axiomatic notions, things that are evidently guaranteed to be true. And so this is what Descartes is after, some more item, concept, or proposition that can be the very crux and foundation of all epistemological understanding of the time. And so the thing that Descartes reasons out is that you must start small and then build from the small to the complex. And this is an extension of Euclid's propositions. And you must go from this, and he has these series of rules and adages which you must do. You must also doubt. And you must start from a place of doubt, because it's not until you doubt something until you're really thinking of it. So Descartes starts this long series of doubts where he begins with his senses. And he reasons basically that his senses can deceive him for the mere fact that his eyes can be a disadvantage into knowing the true properties of a stick or a straw within, well, I said a straw when I was a kid, but he said a stick in water, and how to his eyes it appears bent, but in reality it is not, or how objects at a distance look smaller than they actually are when you approach them, or how things sound louder when farther away, but as they're getting, how things sound louder when they're closer, but as their distance is increasing, they sound quieter, contrary to the actual overall decibel of sound that the thing is producing. So at the very least, one cannot trust their senses. Well, then can one trust what they tactically feel and express? One does not know what their body's really up to. One doesn't know that it's not just a mere collection of deterministic forces causing one to move and to act. What agency does one have? And Descartes also says, well, at the very least, I know I'm here in this chair. But then how can I be certain I'm in this chair? I could honestly be dreaming. I could right now be in my nightgown or naked in bed and dreaming. But because people have vivid dreams, so how can you trust the context of now and your experience to tell you what's truly going on? So Descartes recedes increasingly into complete doubt, to where he then starts trying to rest his hat on what he knows best, which is mathematics and geometry, basically arithmetic, to where he says, I know at the very least within a dream or within any hallucination or happening that 2 plus 3 is still always 5. But how do I know that it's not God causing me to think that 2 plus 3 is 5, playing a trick on me? But this God, there is no shadow that exists in God, so he could not deceive me. But it does not mean that if God is not deceiving me, because there's no deception in God, that there isn't some evil demon doing such things to me. Not maybe of the same nature of God, but equal in power and its ability to manipulate thought. So how does an individual know that they're not being deceived by some greater outside force against the background? And one can extrapolate this even to a greater extent. It's the train of following Descartes' thought. How do you know that everything at your disposal of perception is not a deceptive scheme to you, preventing you from ascertaining the purest form of reasoning you can about the nature of existence? And this is salient because if we're going to construct a system of epistemological utility, then the principle that pervades it must be the truest, surest, and finest, for all other things that will come from it will be built upon it. So is the sentiment and thought. And that's where Descartes realizes in sort of this regression that so long as I can think I am being deceived or think about being deceived, I could not be deceived if I were not here. I could not be deceived if I did not exist. And even if I'm being deceived in seeing these things, at the very least, I can know I'm being deceived. And even more so, I can doubt these deceptions. And when I doubt these deceptions, I truly think. And if I truly think, then I truly am. And that's where he comes up with, I think, therefore I am. And that's the Cogito Ergo Sum. But what is it that people have thought about this? And I guess what's most salient to the request is what is it that I think about this? And I'm somewhat of a materialist. I'm, at the very least, a naturalist, a biologist, and the very fact that I think that anything that's true about human beings has been instantiated and are extant within us because of our evolutionary history. And I'm a evolutionary Darwinian thinker. Or I'm just an evolutionary thinker. I mean, evolution has advanced since Darwin's time. But, so, just, I suppose, like, the first thing I think is just what exactly is I? Because I know human beings not to be any kind of unity of something. a human being is a dissipative structure, which means it's something that holds its innate characteristics but is always transforming. So you're never actually you while being you at the same time. You're this bundle of becoming and potential. You're something that's you're exstantiated in the present, but also a part of you, and the abstract and even the very physical sense is completely embedded in the past, as you are the amalgamation of a long line of evolutionary history, and that history is going to speak on your very actions today, who you are, what you perceive, and just what you know about self and the world. That's a part of you. But then the you that you consciously identify with is fairly constricted to a quasi-deterministic palette in your temperament, and then other superordinate factors that just make you up, as there is a you that you are, but you didn't really get to pick many items of that you, and so much of your culture, your race, and gender are going to influence just the thinking you. And then more so, there's just also all of these subconscious items that are apparent about human beings, insofar as that the other thing about human beings is that we're complexes, we're aggregations. We're a complex of aggregated drives, just motivational schemes that are wedded together in an individual that aren't indissoluble unities. And what I mean is this, in so far as if there's damage to the brain, the person doesn't shut down. You can lose a part of you and still be functioning essentially. I guess it gets down to what do you think you is per se, but very really to be a cogitative entity, it's just about the variability. It's just about the varying degree of cogitation that you want to describe to a self. And what I mean is just that what do you consider as thinking? Because your body thinks, despite Descartes' mind-body duality, which arises from his fact that he considers that the body and the senses very well may be illusions, but he can arrive to a mind for the mere fact of subjective reflection. That's where that duality emerges from. Despite that fact, what cognitive science and despite that conclusion that has to be necessary, given that line of reasoning, the facts stand that you can't have a brain without a body. You don't get the brain that we have without the bodies that we have. You don't get the cortical structures without the innervation of the nervous system and the opposable thumbs, the binocular vision that we have, and several other physiological factors that seem to co-join together through our evolutionary history to legitimately make the brains that we have, the things that we selected for over time. So there is no such thing as a mind without a body. The things don't exist independently. And so it's, quite honestly, you get into this problem of just, what exactly do you mean by thinking? I mean, because there are varying degrees of neurological activity that happens throughout the entire body, and you do not tell your heart what to do, you don't tell your liver what to do, you don't tell your kidneys what to do, you don't tell your spine what to do, you don't tell yourself when you're hungry, you don't tell yourself a lot of things. Just who's doing the thinking, really? Because you're not the master of your house. You're just really not. No human being is. And so, to me, it's just that there gets to be a rather great deal of ambiguity in that. Can I rest myself? Can I rest confidence in the subjective experience to be the underarching proposition that all epistemological frameworks are to emerge from, or just the certainty of self? I think that there's a self, but I don't think that it's like the self of a definite variety, as in there's just this cute whole indissoluble I, and so far as that people are what their thinking or conscious states are. You're just not that. And the fact that your thinking and your conscious states don't have any consistency to them insofar as they can be taken out of, you can be taken out of one sort of conscious state and pulled into another rather easily. And Jean Paul Sartre had this critique of Cogito Ergo Sum, and I rather agree with it because Sartre goes like this, that you say you're counting how many cigarettes you have within a given carton. You will mindlessly be doing this activity if you've done it for a certain number of times, because very really when we repeat activities, they become automated for us, and we don't use the frontal regions to motivate and sustain our activity and our behavior. It goes from the front of the brain to the mid and the back brain. We're not really consciously thinking, not in the way that Descartes is coming to the conclusions he's coming to in the methods, and so or in discursive reasoning. So what Sartre said is, as you're doing this automated kind of, you could say, procedural mandate that your body's essentially mapped onto itself to do this counting thing with the cigarettes, you're not actually thinking until somebody asks you what you're doing. And then you're not doing the thing itself. You're now thinking in an abstract manner about what you had just done, essentially changing that conscious state. You can never be certain about your conscious states, and they're fairly chaotic and shifting. Where you are and what you can be certain of is not all that clear. It's just really not all that clear. And I concur, and I just agree with that insofar as the subjective, to me, is not the best basis for epistemological inquiry, or the bedrock and the foundation of metaphysics. And it gets into more problems because it's fairly circular, because Descartes says that I am, therefore God is, and then when he gets I think, therefore I am, he moves from that argument to, well, if I think, then there must be something outside that thinks that made a thinking being, and that thinking being must be a God. And if the being's this way, then the being must be benevolent and things. And he runs to the idea that if I think, therefore I am, then there is a God. And if God is, then I can be assured that this God created a good mind, because all things that God created was good. So he can rest assured in his reasoning because of the benevolent and all-knowing creator that exists at the generation of the universe in himself. The problem is that Descartes said he was, therefore God was, and now he's using God to take and validate his reasoning in who he is, and that's just a big circular mess. And I don't particularly like that, not simply because I'm an atheist, but just simply because that's kind of circular. But Descartes was trying to do something rather radical, and so I very much admire him for that. And he showed what true rationality is, and so far as it's, if you will not doubt your outward experience, not, well, okay, so this is kind of where Descartes gets it wrong, though, but, I mean, he introduced the school of skeptical methods. I just think that the dialogue should have been a little more two ways, and he should have doubted himself. I mean, I think that's part of the problem. You have to doubt yourself and your conclusions. You just really have to. I don't see any other way that you can truly be rational without doing so. But the point is this, that Descartes did something rather revolutionary, because up until that point it was Aristotle, Plato, and Augustine that were dominating the philosophical scene, and Aristotelian physics and mechanics were being still taught and practiced. And Descartes was the first to really take Greek thought and extend it and go beyond it and try and create different models and adopt the Galilean view of the world and the heliocentric model and things, and try to come to a better understanding of just what the physical reality was, as he prized and he loved physics, and he did a great deal of revolution to mathematics, and permitted Newton and some laid the bedrock for Newton's work. And Cogito Ergo Sum, I think this, that one can't necessarily know just because they think that they actually exist, but I suppose it means just what does one mean by existence. You can't get away from just the messiness of philosophy, and philosophy is only possible with scrutiny and just fine pickiness, quite honestly, and trying to get at just what is there. And it's something that, I mean, I can wrestle with for as long as I want, but the only thing I can honestly say is, if I can act, then I can just accept enough that I'm instantiated in something outside of myself. Why is it that I think it's necessary to go outside the self? Well, I really don't, because, I mean, I can say that living in a time of empirical validation, but I know damn well that I don't really care if the facts disagree with me. So, in this sense, I don't but innately, I agree insofar as that I will trust my own logic and reasoning to be able to arrive at something. At the very least, if I can just consider it, it has some merit insofar as me being something extant in the world, because me being an INTP, I think, therefore I am. That's what I think existence is. But in the broader philosophical sense, that's not a good conclusion, and I think you only fall into the schools of pragmatism and empiricism and have all the evolutions in philosophy with Spinoza, Kant, and Hobbes, and Locke, and, well, Descartes was pre-Hobbes. Spinoza, Kant, and Locke, and Hume, because of this thing, and we now have the Western philosophy that we have because of the thoughts of Descartes. So, hats off to Descartes. My thought is that we just need to continue to keep building our knowledge and to contemplate if it's really possible to unify all of the domains of knowledge, essentially epistemology. And I still think metaphysics and epistemology, obviously, with all the content I make on this channel, is relevant to our time and day now. And there is no such thing as a philosophy-free science. There just isn't. We just rarely examine what philosophies that we hold whenever we're coming up with their theoretical models. So I think that Descartes is wholly relevant, and at least what he teaches us about skepticism definitely has salience. Is Cogito Ergo Sum a proposition to be the foundation of all thinking? Not a perfect one, but one insofar as this, that if I can go out into the world and act and think about what it is that I'm doing and see some sort of correspondence with reality, then I can, at the very least, figure out just what is going on to a very limited capacity. Thus, we have the scientific method. So, take that for what it's worth, and those are my thoughts on Cogito Ergo Sum. Thank you, Leah Vermont.